On Mother's Day, I didn't get flowers. I didn't receive perfume. Not even a hug. I received a box. Inside it, a secret capable of changing my entire life. Believe me, the most painful gift can also be the most liberating. And it was on that day that I discovered the truth that no one had the courage to tell me. I woke before the sun. In that silence you can almost touch, and I stared at the ceiling for a while, like someone praying without words. It was Mother's Day, and my heart beat softly, like a drumbeat at a celebration that begins far away. I made my coffee in the cloth strainer because tradition is also affection, and the smell filled the house like a fond memory. As the water sang in the kettle, I thought of her, of my little girl, and smiled to myself. She's coming early today. It's funny how hope has light steps. It clothes us with a courage we don't even know where it comes from. I opened the windows to let the breeze through the hallways, and the sun timidly filtered in, streaking the walls with golden streaks. I dusted the picture frames with the hem of my apron, and each photo pulled me by the hand back to a time that would never return. There was the first backpack, the first uniform, the first tooth, so many firsts, my God. I touched the frame carefully, as if memory were porcelain. She'll be here early today, I repeated, just to hear the promise spoken aloud. Promises, sometimes, are the only sound that dispels fear. I set the table with unhurried care, a white tablecloth with embroidered flowers, the plates I only use when longing calls for a party, and that glass sugar bowl that belonged to my mother. My hands knew the way, and my body danced its little rituals. Spoon, cup, plate, napkin, everything in its place, as if setting the table also meant setting my heart. I cut a few slices of cornmeal cake I'd baked the day before, and let the butter soften, because she always liked it that way, spreading easily. She's coming early today, I whispered again, and the whisper stayed in the kitchen. As the kettle sighed, I kept the radio on low, just so I wouldn't lose myself in my thoughts. An old bolero played, the kind that turns you inside out, and I found myself twirling alone between the sink and the stove. A laugh escaped, silly and sweet, remembering the afternoons she'd climb on my feet to dance. "Mom, guide me," she'd say, tripping over her own legs. Oh, if she only knew. I'd always needed guidance. And yet, there I was, all of me, repeating the same vow. Today she'll come early. I put on my navy blue dress, the one that gives me a church-like posture and a Sunday hug. I tied my hair back with a single clip, the way the mirror taught me not to fight time. I put on a subtle lipstick, red would be an exaggeration, and sprayed 2 clouds of my old perfume, the same one I used when she was little and would calm down in my lap just from the smell. "It smells like home," she'd say. And I, vain, guarded that title like someone who keeps a medal on their chest. Today I wanted to be that place again. I sat by the window, the cup steaming between my fingers, and listened to the sounds of the street. Hurried footsteps, laughter, a creaking gate, the barking of the neighbor's dog. Every noise seemed like an announcement. The slightest break, and my heart leaped. It's her. But it was only the mailman, the boy on the bike, the lady upstairs. The clock gave its measured scolding on the wall, and I almost begged it to speak more quietly. Time, when we want it to, could learn to whisper. I remembered that when she was a little girl, I always woke up before her to write a silly note, written in colored pen and with a star sticker. "Good morning, my love. Your mother loves you to the heavens." I hid the notes in my lunchbox, between my calligraphy notebook in my coat pockets. Maybe I exaggerated, but our love, when it overflows, cannot be contained. "She's coming early today," I repeated behind my breath, like someone rehearsing a line before going on stage. I didn't want to mess up the line. I opened the closet and took out a small box, lined with flowery fabric, where I keep letters and ribbons. There lie birthdays, report cards, crooked drawings, and a strand of hair that came loose at the first haircut. Is it ridiculous to save a strand of hair? Perhaps. But mothers gather trifles like they build cathedrals. I read an old letter. Mom, you are my safe haven, and I wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. Safe havens don't usually rock, but inside I was the sea. I went to the porch and watered the plants, talking quietly to each one, as I always do. The ferns like secrecy, the cane prefers silence, and the rosebush needs praise to bloom. She's coming early today, I told them all, and the leaves moved as if they understood. The street, so ordinary, seemed like a stage set to me. I, an actress with a predetermined joy, with the right costume and memorized lines. The protagonist was missing. I returned to the living room and adjusted the cushion on the armchair where she always flops down, spreading out her bag and the day's stories. I left a blanket folded on the arm of the sofa, in case the cold decided to sneak in. The smell of cornmeal cake had already made its home, embracing the walls. I took a deep breath, like someone saving air for a dive. Today I didn't want to drown. Today I wanted to float, lightly, in the lap of this date. And yet, something deep inside began to stir the water. I glanced at the clock again, without arguing with it, and sat on the edge of the chair, hands clasped in my lap, my body in the waiting position only mothers know. She's coming early today. The phrase, repeated so many times, suddenly sounded different, as if a thread was pulling inside me, urging me to be cautious. Just a thread. It wasn't sadness, not yet. Was it a warning? Or just the nonsense of an overthinking old woman? I took a sip of the now lukewarm coffee and smiled at the emptiness of the room, trying to convince myself that certain worries are just passing wind. But wind, when it persists, usually heralds change. I can't pinpoint the exact moment the air grew heavy. I only remember feeling a slight weight resting on my sternum, like a tense little bird flapping its wing from within. I picked up the cup again, but the coffee, which had previously embraced me, seemed distant, almost tasteless. "Nonsense, woman," I muttered, trying to dispel the cloud. And yet, the cloud remained. I stood, sat, and stood again, as if searching for a position for a memory that never arrives. Why this discomfort now? Why? I went to the kitchen to check on the cake, even though I knew it was ready, golden brown, and filling the house with its fragrance. I ran my knife down the center, each crumb like a coded warning. I washed the knife slowly, listening to the water in the sink ping like an old radio message. Breathe, I told myself. Breathe, and it will pass. But the body, stubborn as it is, knows things before the mind does. And it whispered, "Be careful." I opened the refrigerator and closed it without taking anything, as if the cold could mend the heat of anxiety. I changed the flowers in the vase, trimming stems, arranging petals, keeping my hands busy to calm my heart. The flowers looked at me with the patience of someone who's seen it all. "She's coming early today," I repeated like a prayer, but the prayer came out with a crack in the middle. Does cracked faith also hold? Or does it? The radio played a song my daughter and I were singing off-key, amid laughter and banging pots and pans. Instead of laughter, I felt a pang. I turned it off. All that remained was the sound of my footsteps, an impatient ticking, and, occasionally, the creaking of the wood on the roof. I remembered when she had a high fever, and I spent the night fanning her, praying, promising the world. The pressure was similar, that vigil without a clear reason. A true mother watches even the wind. I picked up my phone to check the time and the missing message. The screen lit up my face and showed a woman with anxious eyes, the deep wrinkles of someone who's loved deeply. No notifications. "She's coming, Mom, calm down." I imagined her voice, sweet and hurried. I rang her photo in the gallery like a church bell. Silence. Why does absence speak so loudly when we need a whisper? I went to the bedroom and smoothed the bedspread, straightened the pillowcase, and rearranged the books on the bedside table, as if aligning objects would straighten destinies. I opened the drawer and found a lost hair ribbon. The ribbon smelled of old talcum powder and a child's laughter. I pressed it to my chest, trying to let the fabric absorb my fear. It's just silly anxiety, I told the ceiling. But the ceiling didn't respond, and my chest persisted. I returned to the living room and stood before the large mirror, the one that reminds me of who I was and reveals who I am. "You look beautiful," I said to myself, to see if my heart believed it. The reflection returned a polite smile, the kind we give at Seventh-day Mass. It wasn't sadness, not entirely. It was a kind of premonition with light feet and cold hands. What wind is that, coming in without knocking? I leaned my forehead against the window, feeling the warm glass. On the street, a child dragged a stroller. The mother shouted, "Watch out." A boy walked by with headphones on, forgetting the world. Here I was, trying not to forget to breathe. The smell of cake, which had once been the ground, became a reminder of what I didn't want to lose. She's coming," I marked on the glass with my finger. The letters disappeared into the fog, like a fading promise. I sat and closed my eyes, asking the memories for permission to pass. The first Mother's Day with a stick figure, the hug at the school gate, the adolescence filled with slammed doors, and yet, the kiss on the forehead before bed. She knows I love her, I thought, and in that thought, the tightness eased a millimeter, just to prove it could. Love is medicine. But some days the bottle seems further from my hand. The phone didn't ring, the doorbell didn't chime, and I stood there in the gap between what I expect and what happens. My body attentive, my ears pricked, my heart holding its breath like a freediver. A question came slowly, walking barefoot on the carpet. What if? I stopped the question halfway, as if cutting off a word would cut off destiny. Still, my chest tightened once more, demanding answers that the house, so beautiful and ready, couldn't provide. The silence of the house was suddenly broken, not by the doorbell, but by the sharp sound of a key turning in the lock. My heart leaped, as if recognizing it before reason could. I dropped the cup on the table, coffee dripping over the edges, but I didn't care. It's her, I thought, my soul leaping like a girl waiting for a birthday present. I ran to the door, the tightness in my chest mingling with anxious joy, a salve and a wound at the same time. When the door opened, the figure that appeared before me wasn't exactly what I expected. My daughter came in, panting, her hair disheveled, and her eyes a mix of haste and mystery. She hugged me almost urgently, like someone clinging to a plank in the middle of a river. I wrapped my arms around her, breathing in the scent I always recognize, but there was also a strange smell of wet streets and worry. "I'm home, Mom," she said, but her voice wasn't accompanied by the smile it usually carries. It was a cracked voice, like antique porcelain with a hidden crack. I cupped her face in my hands and tried to coax a reassuring look from her, but all I saw was darkness. "Are you okay?" I asked, and the question rang louder than it should have, like a bell echoing in an empty church. She dodged, hurried inside, and dropped her bag on the sofa, in a way that wasn't her own. My daughter had always been one for folding corners, adjusting straps, lining up shoes. In that loose, almost careless gesture, there was a hidden message. The fallen bag seemed to scream what she herself was trying to silence. I stood there, watching, trying to piece together the meaning of that strange arrival. As she walked around the room, absent-mindedly running her fingers over the furniture, I noticed her eyes darting about, lingering on nothing, as if seeking refuge. The cake on the table, which I had lovingly made, elicited no reaction from her. Not even a "that smells good, Mom." Nothing. Just an uncomfortable, heavy silence that settled between us like an unwelcome visitor. I tried to hide it. "See? I made your favorite. I thought you'd like the surprise." She nodded, but the gesture was so small it almost went unnoticed. Her mouth didn't open in praise, and her stomach seemed too busy with another kind of weight. With every second, I felt something moving beneath the skin of the scene, a secret knocking at the door along with her. I sat on the edge of the chair, waiting for her to speak, but no words came. Just a tapping of feet, a smoothing of hair, a barely concealed sigh. "Daughter, look at me," I asked, and in that request I poured years of motherhood, sleepless nights, promises made to heaven. She looked up for a moment, and in that instant I saw there was a storm. "I needed to come, Mom," she murmured, like someone starting to open a jammed door. My heart clenched once more, not from lack, but from excess of mystery, of fear, of love I wanted to protect without even knowing from what. "I needed to," I asked, and my voice trembled. The answer didn't come, just another long sigh that filled the room with questions. Time in that moment seemed to stretch like a rubber band about to snap. The walls of the house, which had once welcomed me, now seemed to push in, conspiring to prevent the truth from fitting in. The clock ticked away in sonorous seconds, each tick a nudge to the soul. I looked at her and felt Mother's Day was far from just parties and cake. Something bigger, more profound, had just walked through the door with her. Mystery hung in the air, and all I could think was, what could my little girl be hiding? She stood up slowly, as if her legs were heavy with lead, and walked over to the bag lying on the sofa. My heart pounded, sensing that more than just a colorful paper package would emerge. I saw her trembling hands rummaging through it, and for a moment the silence was so thick I could almost hear my own thoughts echoing. She glanced at me, and that look said it all. It wasn't just a gift, it was a message from destiny. When I finally pulled out the object, I noticed it wasn't wrapped in ribbons or bows. It was a simple, dull box, without the expensive store label. That had already struck me as odd, because my daughter had always been one to exaggerate the details, to lavish gifts on her, as if trying to make up for the absences of time. This time, however, there was an almost harsh simplicity, as if the box concealed more weight than its appearance suggested. She held the box like someone holding a secret. She came to me, held out her hands, but hesitated halfway. It was then that I realized how difficult it was for her to hand it to me. "Mom, this is your gift," she said, her choked voice cutting through my chest like a knife. I took a deep breath, trying to lighten the moment, but something inside me screamed, "This gift is not ordinary. This gift carries pain." I picked up the box slowly, as if it were crystal about to shatter. Upon opening it, my eyes met something that was not an object, but a symbol. There were no jewelry, no perfumes, no flashy mementos. What I found was an old photograph, carefully folded, next to a handwritten letter. Touching the yellowed paper, I felt the weight of memory. My daughter lowered her head, as if she couldn't bear to see my reaction. My fingers trembled. I opened the photograph first. It was of the two of us, in the backyard of our old house, when she was still a child. I held her in my arms, and her smile lit the image like morning sunlight. But there was more. On the back of the photo, a scrawled dedication, not hers. My heart froze. It was someone else's handwriting, a presence from the past I hadn't expected to find there. I looked at my daughter for answers, but she looked away. I then turned to the letter. The firm handwriting took me back in time. Each word seemed to have been written with care, but also with urgency. The first lines took my breath away. They spoke of choices, of interrupted paths, of truths never told to me. It was as if, in that piece of paper, a revelation capable of turning my life upside down was condensed. "Why now?" I asked in a whisper. My daughter didn't answer immediately, just squeezed my hands tightly. "Because the time has come, Mom. I couldn't carry this alone anymore." Her voice was firm, but her teary eyes betrayed the storm raging within. I stared at her silently, knowing that from then on nothing would be the same. The gift I received that Mother's Day wasn't store-bought, didn't fit in a pretty bag, wasn't a shelf decoration. It was the delivery of a truth held for years, an open wound, wrapped in photography and ink. I felt life pulling me back to the center of the arena, forcing me to face battles I thought were over. The cake on the table, the flowers in the vase, the smell of coffee, everything lost its meaning in the face of that revelation. It was as if time had stopped, leaving only me, my daughter, and that letter burning in my hands. And there, deep in my heart, I knew this was only the beginning of the pain and transformation that lay ahead. After reading those first lines, I closed the letter slowly, as if trying to hold time in my own hands. The entire room seemed to have lost its color. The clock continued to tick away, but the sound was no longer the same. Each ticking sounded like a hammer pounding inside my chest. My daughter was beside me, but the silence that stretched between us was so loud it hurt. She moved her fingers, interlacing and releasing them, as if searching for an invisible exit. I looked at her, but didn't ask anything. Perhaps because I already knew that any word spoken at that moment would be laced with tears. The silence, paradoxically, spoke more than the two of us together could have. It was a silence that screamed truths, that exposed pain without needing a voice. The cake on the table, which had once symbolized celebration, now seemed like a useless decoration. The sweet scent mingled with the bitterness of the letter that still weighed heavily on my hands. The flowers in the vase, which I had chosen with such care, wilted beneath the force of that absence of sound. It was as if everything around me understood that the house no longer breathed joy, but rather an invisible tension. My daughter took a deep breath, trying to speak, but her voice died in her throat. And I, not wanting to pressure her, remained silent as well. It was a silent war, me waiting for an explanation, and she struggling to find the courage. The air between us felt dense, heavy, almost solid. If anyone were to enter that room, they would surely feel the weight of this stillness screaming through our bodies. I remembered when she was little and threw tantrums. Sometimes, her silence hurt me more than her screams. Now, as a grown woman, that same silence returned with more intensity, as if it were the recurrence of an old pain. Only this time it wasn't a tantrum. It was something bigger, something that touched the deep roots of our history. Inside, I wanted to break down that wall. I wanted to ask, who wrote this letter? What haven't you told me all this time? But my words stuck, stifled by the fear of hearing answers that might shatter me. So I kept quiet, and in that silence, each beat of my heart seemed to echo through the room, like a muffled scream. My daughter, her eyes brimming with tears, stood up suddenly. She walked to the window, opened the curtains, and let the light flood the space. But even the brightness couldn't dispel the darkness that hung between us. She leaned against the windowsill, took another deep breath, and, without looking at me, let out a barely audible whisper. "I didn't want it to be like this, Mom." Those words, slung into the air, were like stones thrown into a lake. Their impact rippled through me. I wanted to run to her, hug her, tell her that together we would face everything. But at the same time, something paralyzed me. The fear of what was yet to come, of what that letter truly meant, kept me sitting still, listening only to the echo of that silence that screamed mercilessly. Time seemed to drag on, each minute longer than the last. And there I was, knowing that this silence wasn't the end. It was merely the prelude to a greater revelation, one that was about to unfold before me, changing not just Mother's Day, but the entire story of my life. She was still facing away, staring out the window, when I decided to get up. My legs trembled as if carrying the weight of years, but I walked over to her. I touched her shoulder lightly, and in that gesture I summoned all the courage I had left. She turned her face slowly, and her teary eyes cut deeper than any knife could. I knew, in that instant, that something huge was lodged in her throat. "Daughter, talk to me," I whispered. The words came out almost like a plea, because I knew the silence couldn't last any longer. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Only a stifled sob came, as if her soul were choking. She held my hand so tightly that her fingers grew cold, and in that silent grip was written a plea for help. I sat back down, pulling her with me to the sofa. She slumped beside me, her shoulders hunched, as if she'd been carrying an invisible burden for too long. Her body spoke for her. Pent-up tension, shallow breathing, restless hands. It was as if every movement were a silent scream, a plea for me not to give up waiting. I don't know where to begin, I finally said, my voice breaking. It was the first time the words had emerged, still fragile, but already paving the way for the truth. I simply nodded, unhurriedly encouraging. Start wherever your heart tells you, daughter. We'll work the rest out together. My tone was firm, but inside I trembled, afraid of what I was about to hear. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a few seconds, as if diving into the depths of a dark well. When she opened them, a tear fell without asking permission. Mom, there are things I've hidden from you, because I didn't want to hurt you. Those words fell between us like heavy stones. I swallowed hard, knowing, if what she hid was capable of hurting, then the wound was already open long before the confession. The untouched cake on the table seemed to mock the situation. The candles I had so lovingly purchased were still in the cupboard, waiting for a party. But what party could resist such a revelation? Everything I had prepared had become an insignificant detail compared to the pain throbbing there in the middle of the room. I needed to protect you, Mom, and also protect myself, she continued, her voice almost breaking. I looked at her, surprised, because I always thought I was the one protecting her. The role reversal left me disarmed. How could my daughter see herself as the guardian? What monsters was she facing in silence, believing it was better to spare me? For a moment, I wanted to interrupt, ask her right away, get the words out of her mouth. But I held back. I knew that choked words don't come out with brutality, but with patience. And I stood there, breathing deeply, waiting for her to find the courage to continue. Silence enveloped us again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence that screamed. It was the silence that prepared the ground for something greater. I could feel it. The words were there, trapped, but ready to burst like a flood breaking a dam. And with a heavy heart, all I could think was, am I ready to hear it? She took a deep breath, wiped away the tears with her fingertips, and finally let out the words that had been choking her so much. Mother, this letter isn't just a memory. It's a confession. My heart raced, and for a moment I felt lost. The word confession sounded like a sentence, heavy with weight, as if it announced an abyss. I held the letter tightly, trying to find support in something as fragile as the yellowed paper. Whose confession? I asked, my voice low, almost pleading for it not to be what I already feared. She hesitated, looked away, and in that look I found the answer before I even heard it. From someone you loved, Mother. From someone who has never left your life, even in silence. Those words burned. It was as if past and present suddenly collided within me. I opened the letter again, rereading the lines more carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was his. The man who had marked my youth, but also my pain. The man who had given me memories and scars. My chest tightened, and a mixture of anger and longing began to rage like a storm inside me. Why do you have this? Who gave it to you? I asked, almost breathless. She pressed her lips together before answering. Mom, he never completely disappeared. He was nearby, watching from afar. And I knew it long before you knew it. The ground fell away beneath my feet. The weight of the truth was crashing down on us, revealing a parallel story, hidden for years, that was now mercilessly revealed. The letter spoke of bad choices, of mistakes confessed too late, of regret. It also spoke of love, of longing, of a presence that never left. I read and reread, and with each sentence I felt a different stab. It was as if that man, even absent, had found a cruel way to remain within us, secretly weaving our story together. My daughter watched me silently, waiting for my reaction. But what reaction could possibly fit there? Anger? Forgiveness? Sadness? It all came together, jumbled together, too heavy for one person to carry. I was torn between the urge to tear up the letter and the need to keep it as proof that I hadn't gone mad. I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I didn't want to cry in front of her. I needed to show strength, even though I was shattered inside. I held her hand, looked into her eyes, and simply said, "Daughter, you shouldn't carry this weight alone." She lowered her head, and a tear fell onto my arm. In that moment, I realized that the truth doesn't always set us free. Sometimes it imprisons us. The weight of that revelation left us more trapped in the past than ever. And yet, I knew it was too late to go back. The veil had been torn, and nothing could hide it anymore. The clock continued to tick, but for me, time had stopped. There, between the letter and the tears, Mother's Day had become a turning point. And I knew, from then on, every word would have the power to rewrite my story, for better or for worse. I held that letter to my chest like a knife that has already wounded me, yet remains sharp. It was impossible not to feel the bitter taste of the past resurfacing, tearing at scars I swore had healed. The wound, which had slumbered silently for years, now opened before my eyes, exposed and bleeding again. The worst part was that I wasn't the one who reopened it. It was my own daughter who brought back the pain I'd avoided facing. Memories came flooding back. I remembered the young woman I'd been, the dreams cut short, the disappointment that shaped me. Every detail I'd tried to bury resurfaced with force. His scent, the sound of his voice, the promises never fulfilled, everything came back like ghosts sitting at the table with us. Mother's Day, which should have been a celebration, had turned into a session of emotional torture. My daughter, sitting beside me, wept silently. I knew it wasn't easy for her, but inside me, pain mixed with indignation. Why now? Why give me this gift that, instead of blossoming, only hurt? I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice wouldn't come. The lump in my throat was stronger than any words. The cruelest thing was the feeling that it had all been calculated by fate. So accustomed to standing tall even when the world was falling apart, now felt small before this revelation. The letter not only reopened an old wound, but also made me realize that I've never stopped bleeding. I've only learned to live with the pain like someone living with a shadow. I looked at my daughter again. Her face reflected my own pain, as if she too had inherited the scars of my history. And I understood. This wound wasn't just mine. It was ours. The truth had crossed generations, and now we stood together before it, vulnerable, without a shield, without escape. I felt my chest burn, as if my heart was crying out for lost time. What could have been if the truth had come sooner? If I had faced it back then, would I have avoided so much suffering? Or is it that some pains are inevitable, and fate always finds a way to exact them? These questions swirled in my mind, unanswered. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavier. I stood and walked to the kitchen, trying to escape for a few moments. But even then, the letter seemed to haunt me, clinging to my hands, as if it had a life of its own. I leaned against the sink and took a deep breath, but the smell of stale coffee brought back even more memories. Nothing could ease the weight of that reopened wound. I returned to the living room, looked at my daughter, and in a whisper said, "You know this changes everything, don't you?" She just nodded, tears streaming uncontrollably. I cried too, but silently, letting the pain flow without fanfare. Because sometimes crying isn't an outburst, it's just the body's way of enduring what the soul can't. In that moment, I realized the wound wasn't just reopened. It demanded healing. But the healing wouldn't come easily or quickly. And I wondered, was there still time to sew up what had been torn? Or had life already decided that this pain would be my companion until the end of my days? I sat back down, exhausted, the letter still clutched tightly in my hands. The paper trembled with me, as if it were made of pain itself. My daughter remained silent, tears flowing without her trying to hold them back. The sound of her crying tore me apart, because it wasn't just a daughter's lament. It was also the echo of everything I'd hidden, everything I hadn't said, everything that had built up between us like invisible walls. Questions began to surge within me, one after another, relentless. Why had she hidden this for so long? Who else knew? To what extent had this truth tainted our lives without me realizing it? My mind spun in circles, but I found no answers. Only more silence, more emptiness, more shared tears. I looked at my daughter, my eyes brimming with tears, and asked, "Why did you wait so long, my daughter? Why today of all days?" My voice cracked, not with anger, but with sheer helplessness. She bit her lip, took a deep breath, and murmured, "Because I couldn't carry it alone anymore, Mom. I needed to share this burden with you." Those words hit me like arrows. Part of me understood, but another part revolted. I'd always believed my role was to protect her, but suddenly I discovered she was the one trying to protect me. And that hurt. Because if she had to keep it a secret, it was because perhaps I'd been too tough or too fragile to be the safe haven she expected. Tears streamed down my face without me realizing it. I tried to be strong, but it was impossible to maintain my composure in the face of so much uncertainty. I took her hand and pressed it against my chest so she could feel the rapid beating of my heart. "See? It still hurts, it still bleeds, but I'd rather know the truth than live deceived." The clock continued to tick away, merciless. And each passing minute seemed to hold more questions than answers. What kind of life had this secret stolen from us? What paths could have been different? Was there love hidden between the lines of that letter, or just regret? My daughter tried to speak again, but choked on her own tears. I hugged her tightly, like someone about to fall into an abyss. And there, amidst sobs and silence, we understood that we were not alone in our pain. The wound was split in two, and the questions that arose no longer belonged solely to me, but to her as well. What else could this confession reveal? I didn't know. I was only certain that Mother's Day would never be remembered the same way again. Between tears and questions, we were opening a new chapter in our story, a chapter where nothing would be simple, and where each answer would carry the risk of more pain. In that instant, I realized there was no way around this. The unspoken words had already become a wall, and the only way to break through was confrontation. I took a deep breath, wiping away the tears with the back of my hand, and said firmly, "Daughter, enough half-truths. I need to know everything. Now." My voice echoed through the room, firm but filled with pain. She flinched, as if my words were thrown stones. Still, she didn't look away. Her eyes, red from crying, revealed a courage that surprised me. "Mom, I didn't want it to be this way, but it's time for you to face what you've always avoided." My heart froze. It was as if she were turning a mirror on me, forcing me to see what I never wanted to see. The silence in the room became heavy, almost unbearable. The forgotten cake on the table, the flowers beginning to wilt in the vase. Everything seemed to mock what should have been a day of celebration. I felt the cruel irony of fate. On Mother's Day, I had to face the truth that stripped me of all the strength I claimed to possess. "You knew he never really left, didn't you?" she insisted, her voice firm despite her tears. The question cut me deep. I wanted to deny it, but something inside me recognized the truth. Yes, somewhere in my soul I always knew. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. I stood up suddenly, pacing back and forth like a caged beast. With each step, a memory surfaced. The sleepless nights, the unanswered phone calls, the messages that never reached me. And now it all made sense. He was there, lurking, and I, blinded by grief, pretended not to see. My daughter stood up too, holding the letter out to me. "Read it again, Mom." This time without fear. I took the paper with trembling hands. The words that had once been blurs of suffering now became sharp spears, piercing every remaining defense I had. It wasn't just a confession. It was a call. Anger began to mix with the pain. Anger at him for leaving me. Anger at myself for having accepted absence as fate. Anger at time, which never returns, which only accumulates wounds. And, above all, anger at the confrontation that now imposed itself without giving me a choice. I looked at my daughter, my eyes brimming with tears, and whispered, "If he wanted me to know, then let him come tell me. I'm not running away anymore." The decision came from within me like a silent but definitive scream. It was time to face it, no matter who it hurts. The confrontation, I knew, wouldn't just be with him. It would also be with myself, with my fears, my illusions, my memories. And perhaps that would be the most painful challenge, looking in the mirror and recognizing the woman I had become. The day was already getting dark when I heard the doorbell ring. My heart leaped in my chest, as if sensing something greater than a simple visitor. My daughter looked at me, startled, and in that look was confirmation of my fears. She already knew who was on the other side. Silence filled the room, heavy, dense, until I summoned the courage to get up and walk to the door. Each step felt like a mile. My hands were sweating cold, my legs were shaking, but I still turned the doorknob. When the door opened, time stood still. There he was, aged, his gray hair betraying the cruel passage of time, but his eyes, oh, those eyes were the same ones that once promised me the world. I gasped. A mixture of anger, longing, and indignation shot through me like a bolt of lightning. "What are you doing here?" I managed to say, my voice harsher than I expected. He lowered his head for a moment, as if carrying centuries of regret, and replied, "It's time for me to face what I left behind." My daughter came over and placed her hand on my shoulder. It was as if she were saying without words, "That's it, Mom. There's no more running away." My maternal instinct screamed to protect her from that presence, but a part of me also needed to listen, needed to face it. It was like opening a door not only to my home, but to my soul. He took a step inside, and the room seemed to shrink even further. The air grew heavy, heavy with memories and everything that was never said. The cake on the table was forgotten, the flowers wilted, but none of that mattered now. It all came down to the three of us, trapped in a present that dragged the past along with its currents. A shiver ran down my spine. I looked at him and saw not only the man who had left his mark on me, but also the ghost who had haunted my days and nights. "You have no idea what you've caused," I said, fighting back tears. He sighed deeply and replied, "Yes, I do. That's why I'm here." His words sounded sincere, but I no longer knew if I could believe them. After all, the same mouth that now confessed guilt had once sworn eternal love, and I'd learned the hard way how promises can turn to dust. Still, there was no denying it. That unexpected visit would change everything from then on. My daughter looked from one to the other, like an involuntary mediator in a private court. I could sense the weight she carried, and it tore at my core. It wasn't fair that she should be caught in the middle of this duel of memories and pain, but it was too late. Fate had already decided to place her as a key player in this story. Night was falling outside, and darkness seemed to invade my chest as well. The encounter I had feared for so many years was now before me, with no turning back. I knew, from then on, there was no hiding the truth, no escaping the wound that was beginning to throb again, demanding to be healed, or perhaps to be open to the end. He sat at the table as if he'd never left, as if the space still held a place reserved for him, even after so many years of absence. I remained standing, watching his every move, feeling anger and longing warring within me like two beasts trapped in the same cage. My daughter silently pulled out a chair for me, as if asking, "Sit down, Mom. It's time to listen." The letter lay between us, on the already crumpled tablecloth, like physical proof of everything that had been said and hidden. He stared at it with teary eyes, and I knew that piece of paper carried more weight than any gift. No cake, flowers, or celebration could erase the presence of that past, laid bare before us all. "You owe me an explanation," I said, my voice firm, trying to control the tremor in my hands. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his gray hair, and replied, "I know. I've spent my whole life rehearsing this moment, but I never had the courage to show up." His words echoed like hammer blows in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why he preferred silence, why he let me carry the weight of a life cut short alone. But something inside me paralyzed me. Maybe it was the fear of hearing a truth even crueler than the abandonment itself. Maybe it was the secret hope that, amidst so much pain, there was an explanation that made sense. He reached for the letter, but I grabbed it first. "No, this is mine now. You've had decades to speak. Today it's my turn to ask." My eyes burned, and I knew with each word the ground between us was cracking even deeper. My daughter, with unshed tears, watched like someone watching a duel she didn't ask to witness. "I never stopped loving you," he said, his voice cracking. Those words, once meant to be a bomb, now sounded like poison. Because what good is love without presence? What good is feeling without action? Loving and abandoning don't fit in the same sentence, and yet he tried to weave the two together as if they were compatible. The whole room seemed to spin. I took a deep breath, trying not to drown in the jumble of memories that came back like waves. The hugs of long ago, the promises made on full moon nights, the plans that had turned to dust. Now it was all there, sitting at the table, staring at me with eyes of belated regret. My daughter held my hand under the table, as if asking for calm, but also as if reminding me, "Mom, you are not alone." That gave me the strength to maintain my composure, to not give in to the chaos that threatened to engulf me. Because, for the first time, I had someone on my side in this battle with the past. The clock on the wall ticked away, oblivious to the unfolding drama. And I knew this impromptu dinner wouldn't end any time soon. His presence at the table was just the beginning. The real weight would come with the answers, or lack thereof. The silence at the table was almost unbearable. The sound of the clock ticking away seemed to mock our anguish, reminding us that time, cruel and relentless, never goes back. I looked at him and saw not only the man from my past, but also the weight of all the choices he'd made, and the ones I'd failed to make. He cleared his throat, trying to gather his words, and finally began, "I never had the courage to face you. What I did was cowardice, and I knew that by remaining silent, I was condemning you and our daughter to bear alone a pain that should have been mine as well." His voice trembled, and for a moment I almost believed there was genuine regret there. But soon indignation overcame me. Cowardice? Is this what you call disappearing from the lives of two women who depended on you? Cowardice is an understatement. My daughter squeezed my arm, as if begging me not to give in to my anger, but the open wound throbbed too much to ignore. He lowered his eyes and continued, "I saw you from afar more often than you can imagine. I just didn't have the courage to approach you. I thought it was too late, and that fear held me captive for decades." Hearing this, my body froze. It was as if a shadow had watched me, as if my life had never been mine alone. My daughter couldn't hold back her tears. "You have no idea what that did to me," she said, her voice breaking. "Knowing you were around and yet you never showed up, it destroyed me inside." The entire room seemed to shrink at her confession, and in that instant I realized the depth of the scar his silence had left. I looked at him with teary eyes and asked, "And why now? Why choose today of all days to show up?" He took a deep breath and replied, "Because today is Mother's Day. And I knew I couldn't go another day without looking into the eyes of the woman who carried it all alone, or the daughter I never had the courage to call my own. Those words hit me hard. It was as if he'd poked a raw nerve, reminding me that Mother's Day, which should be a celebration, was already forever marked as a day of painful revelations. My daughter cried. I tried to hold myself together, and he, sitting before us, seemed finally stripped of all mask. The table, so often a place of laughter and family meals, was now a courtroom, an altar, and a battlefield all at once. Every word spoken was a testimony, every tear shed was proof, and every silence carried more truth than any speech. I knew that from then on, nothing would be the same. The past, finally laid bare, had changed everything. And the question that kept running through my mind was there still room for forgiveness, or were we doomed to live only with the revelations that had hurt us? In that moment, I realized there was no escape. I would have to choose between remaining trapped in the past or taking a step forward, even with the wounds still raw. His presence in my living room after so many years wasn't just a reunion, it was a crossroads. And every crossroads leaves a scar. My daughter looked at me with pleading eyes, begging me not to let my anger consume me. But at the same time, I sensed her need to hear a decision from me, a firm stance. I was a mother, always the safe haven, and now I needed to be the compass too. Except my heart was divided. He spoke in a low voice, almost a whisper. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that there's still time to repair, somehow, what I destroyed. Those words fell on me like stones. Because time can heal, but it also leaves marks, leaving scars that never fade. And mine was already etched in iron. I remembered so many nights I cried alone, hiding my tears so my daughter would believe everything was under control. I remembered the days I worked twice as hard, without support, without a shoulder to lean on, without a partner. Each memory was a wound he reopened just by being there. And now he was asking me to fix it? As if it were possible to give back what had been ripped from me? The room felt colder. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I realized this decision wasn't just about him. It was about me, about who I chose to be from now on. Whether I would allow the wound to continue to rule me or find the strength to break free from its thrall. My daughter squeezed my hand and said softly, "Mom, whatever you decide, I'll be with you." That simple phrase carried the weight of a hug on my soul. Because, deep down, the choice was mine, but the consequences would be ours. There was no separating the pain, because our lives had always been intertwined. I looked at him and replied, "You may have come for redemption, but I'm not here to ease your conscience. My life has moved on without you. My scar is proof of that. And I won't let it open again just so you can feel at peace." The words came out firmly, but my chest burned. The choice had been made, even if it hurt. I wasn't willing to start over, but I also didn't want to be a prisoner of anger. There was a middle ground, accepting the scar as part of me, but not letting it define my future. He lowered his head, defeated. My daughter wept silently, and I felt that night would mark our lives forever. Because some choices don't bring happiness, but they do bring liberation. And that's what I chose, to be free, even with the scars. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. I felt my heart race, as if each beat reminded me of the weight of the words I had just spoken. Forgiveness. Oh, how that word echoed within me. Forgiveness doesn't erase anything, doesn't reverse abandonment, doesn't return stolen years. But denying forgiveness also has its price. It carries invisible chains that bind us to resentment. He lifted his tear-filled eyes and murmured, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need it to keep breathing." Those words hit me like a slap in the face. All my life, I'd been the one struggling to breathe through hardship, and now he was telling me he depended on me to free himself. It was almost cruel to hear, but at the same time, it revealed the depth of guilt he carried. My daughter wiped away her tears with trembling hands. She looked at me as if begging for peace. Perhaps, deep down, forgiveness was less about him and more about us, about lifting a burden that had stretched across generations. Because I saw in her eyes the reflection of my pain, and I knew that until I released that weight, she wouldn't be able to release hers either. I took a deep breath, feeling the air rush through my inner wounds. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, I said firmly. Forgiveness isn't absolution. It's simply choosing to no longer carry the weight you left on my shoulders. He wept softly, and for a moment, I saw in that aging man a fragility I'd never seen before. But forgiveness came at a high price. It meant letting go of the anger that had so often kept me going. It meant accepting that I would never have the answers I sought. And most importantly, it meant shedding the role of victim and assuming the role of survivor. It wasn't easy, it wasn't simple, but perhaps it was the only way to avoid festering alongside the resentment. My daughter smiled through her tears, holding my hand tightly. It was as if she, too, had been freed in that moment, as if the knot that had suffocated her had finally been untied. I understood then that forgiveness had the power to span generations. That it wasn't just between him and me, but between all of us. I looked into his eyes and said, I forgive you, not for you, but for me and for her. Those words were filled with pain, but also with relief. Because forgiveness didn't erase the story, but it did put an end to the emotional slavery it had imposed on me. He cried nonstop, repeating thank you like a mantra. I felt no joy, nor any immediate relief. What I felt was a strange emptiness, as if I'd let go of a heavy suitcase I'd carried for decades. And now, without it, I had to learn to walk again. The price of forgiveness was precisely this, letting go of the pain that had already become part of me. It was losing an old acquaintance, bitter but constant. And that, ironically, hurt as much as carrying it. He stood slowly, as if carrying centuries on his shoulders. His tear-filled eyes searched mine, begging for something I wasn't ready to give. He hesitantly opened his arms, waiting for me to cross the space between us. But I remained still, my feet planted firmly in the ground, like roots refusing to be pulled up. My daughter, still seated, watched silently. Her eyes urged me to be generous, but they also understood the hardship of my choice. Because a hug, in that moment, wouldn't just be a gesture. It would be a pact, an invitation to reopen the door I had just closed with so much effort. He tried to take a step forward, but I held up my hand, stopping him. Don't confuse forgiveness with reconciliation, I said firmly, my voice echoing in the room like a warning. I freed you from my anger, but I won't give you back the place you lost. It was as if my words struck him harder than any shout could. The air grew thick. For a moment, it felt like even time stood still, awaiting my final decision. And I knew that if I gave in to the embrace, I would lose the meaning of everything I'd said before. Forgiveness would lose its weight, and I would once again be a hostage to the past. So I chose to maintain my distance, painful but necessary. My daughter discreetly wiped away a tear. She understood, better than anyone, that some wounds heal but can't bear touch, and that not all forgiveness needs to come with intertwined arms. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is to refuse a gesture that would make us bleed again. He let his arms fall in defeat. His shoulders slumped, and the man who had once seemed unshakable now seemed fragile, almost small. That image was etched in me, not as revenge, but as a reminder that even the strongest succumb to the weight of their choices. I took a deep breath, trying not to waver. Inside me, there was a part that wanted to run to that embrace, but the more conscious part screamed that it wasn't time. That the embrace, if it came, would have to be born of a new truth, not a desperate attempt to stitch together a shattered past. The room remained silent, except for the sound of the wind blowing against the window. This sound reminded me that life, went on outside, indifferent to our plight. And perhaps this was the greatest reminder. Life doesn't stop to wait for our pain to resolve itself. He sat back down, head down. I held my ground, and the hug, the one he so desperately wanted, hung in the air like a promise that would never be fulfilled. When the door closed behind him, the house fell into a silence that seemed greater than any noise. It was a dense, almost physical silence that spread through the rooms like an ancient shadow. I stood still, staring at the still jiggling doorknob, feeling that this small movement symbolized the end of a cycle, a painful but necessary cycle. My daughter remained silent beside me. No words could convey what was happening inside us. The crying had already ended, the anger had turned to exhaustion, and all that remained was a profound weariness. It was as if we had fought a war without weapons, and now only ruins remained. I sat down at the table again, the same table where so many revelations had been poured out hours before. I ran my hand over the wooden surface, as if caressing a memory. There, imbued not only the pain of that night, but also the strength I'd found to say enough. And that strength, even mixed with sadness, made me breathe deeper. My daughter broke the silence with a simple question. "Mom, are you okay?" I smiled, a bitter smile, and replied, "I don't know yet, but I know I'm lighter." It was the absolute truth. The weight I'd carried for decades had been lifted, even if it hadn't been completely resolved. The wall clock announced the passing of the hours, and I realized the night was drawing to a close. Dawn was approaching, bringing with it that strange feeling of rebirth. Because, paradoxical as it was, there was something liberating about that emptiness. The silence after departure wasn't just absence, it was space. Space for my daughter and I to fill with whatever we wanted. She then rested her head on my shoulder, and together we stayed like that in silence. It was in that simple gesture that I found the answer I was looking for. I no longer needed anything but her presence. Because, in the end, it was the bond between us that sustained me, not the shadows of the past. I looked around the house and realized that, despite the heavy memories, it remained my home. And home isn't defined by the visitors who arrive, but by those who stay. That man had been merely a late visitor, while my daughter was the root that held me together. The silence, which had previously felt suffocating, began to transform into an ally. He no longer shouted, but simply cradled me, allowing me to process everything without rushing. It was the silence of slow but inevitable healing. That morning, I learned that answers don't always come with words. Sometimes they arrive in the void left by a departure. And it was in that emptiness that I realized that, despite the pain, I had finally achieved the peace that had eluded me. The sun rose timidly that morning, as if even it respected the weight of the night we'd shared. I woke with heavy eyes, but a different heart. Mother's Day, always surrounded by flowers, hugs, and simple gifts, had this time given me an unexpected gift, the truth. And as bitter as it was also liberating. My daughter made the coffee silently, as if she understood that gestures speak louder than words. The smell of warm bread mingled with the fresh coffee, bringing a warmth that reminded me of times gone by, when the house was full and the future still seemed whole. I sat at the table and, for the first time in many years, felt exactly where I was supposed to be. As she served me, I thought about everything that had been revealed. The pain, the tears, the reopened wound, but I also thought about the strength I discovered within myself. I realized that the true gift of that day hadn't been the box containing the letter, but the opportunity to close a cycle of silence, of waiting, and of invisible chains that imprisoned me in the past. I looked at my daughter and smiled. You know, my daughter, this is the hardest Mother's Day I've ever had. But it's also the most important. Because today I understood that being a mother isn't just about enduring, it's also about choosing what to leave behind. She held my hand, and in that grip was all the complicity that united us. The flowers that arrived later, delivered by neighbors and relatives, felt different that year. They weren't just holiday decorations, they were symbols of rebirth. I no longer saw his absence as an endless hole, but as a fertile space for new memories. Memories my daughter and I would build together, without ghosts to haunt us. The silence of the previous night had turned into a learning experience. I understood that forgiving didn't mean accepting back, and that loving didn't require forgetting whoever had hurt me. Mother's Day, which began as a wound, ended as a scar, a mark that didn't shame me, but told my story. As the day progressed, I received connections, messages, and hugs from afar. But nothing compared to my daughter's look, which told me without words, we're together. And that was all that mattered. Everything else was just details. That night, when I closed my eyes, I silently gave thanks. I gave thanks for the pain that made me strong, for the truth that freed me, and for the daughter who sustained me. I understood that life, however cruel it may seem at times, always offers the chance to begin again. The Mother's Day that changed everything wasn't the happiest, nor the most festive, but it was the most genuine. And, deep down, it's the truth that saves us, even when it comes like a whirlwind. Today, when I close my eyes, I don't remember the tears. I remember the courage, from the silence that freed me, and the certainty that no pain is greater than the love that remains. If this story touched your heart, leave your like. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories. And tell me in the comments, do you believe that forgiveness liberates even when the hug never happens?